Millions of Americans across the country have already cast their ballots, either by mail or in person. On Tuesday, early voting began in Hawaii, Utah, and Wisconsin, a state that's also quickly becoming a new coronavirus hotspot. Over the past few weeks, the state has seen record highs in new cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. Twice last week, more than 4,000 new cases were reported in a single day. Some of Wisconsin's hospitals are having trouble keeping up, reporting ICUs over 100% capacity. But the COVID surge still hasn't deterred some voters from casting their ballots in person. For more, let's bring in Adam Brewster. Adam is a CBS News campaign reporter covering Michigan, Texas, and Wisconsin. Hi there, Adam. Great to see you. So you have seen some of these early voting locations firsthand. What sort of safety precautions are in place?
Some of the things that you're looking at are the things we've all come to used to seeing in our lives. There's plexiglass where the election workers are to create a barrier between election workers and voters in some locations. There's markers on the ground for social distancing. There's hand sanitizer. There's disinfectant for surfaces. They are spacing people apart. They are spacing voting booths further apart. They are limiting the number of people that they allow inside at one time. This is the third election Wisconsin has run since the COVID-19 pandemic began. Of course, that election back in April and the primary in August and this one now. And they have been very concerned always about protecting voters and making sure it is as safe of an experience as possible. Of course, that means things might take a little bit longer when things get wiped down and disinfected. But overall, people who have voted today have said they felt very safe, felt very comfortable going inside.
Well, what is the state expecting in terms of turnout during the 11-day early voting window?
You know, we'll get a first good taste tomorrow morning when they update the absentee ballot numbers. All of these early in-person votes are technically absentee ballots. That means they will be grouped with the mail-in ballots and they won't be counted until Election Day. Officials have expected 1.5 to 2 million people may vote absentee. That's the combined mail ballots and in-person ballots. Already more than 900,000 people have returned their mail ballots. It is the high watermark for absentee voting came during that April election with about 1.1 million absentee votes. That number could be crossed tomorrow, depending on how turnout was around Wisconsin today. But early in-person voting has typically been the popular method. Normally, Milwaukee and Madison have been allowing several weeks for early voting in recent elections. A ruling from a federal appeals court this summer cut that down to like a 12-day period starting 2 weeks before the election until the Sunday before the election. So a shorter window than folks here in Milwaukee have been used to in some recent elections.
Well, Wisconsin doesn't open mail-in ballots until Election Day. What impact might that have when it's time to start tallying up the votes?
Well, it means they can't get a head start, right? Some states like Florida start processing and counting mail ballots as they come in and kind of keep up with the workload. This is going to be an unprecedented amount of absentee ballots that are returned in Wisconsin, where they're already approaching the record for most absentee ballots, and that will take time. They are helped by the fact that some of the things that they have to check, if you sign your ballot, that's on the outside. If your witness filled out all of the information that they need to fill out, that's all on the outside of the ballot. They can sort it and take it to the precincts. Many places in Wisconsin count absentee ballots at the polling location where someone would have voted. But cities like Milwaukee do it all in one location. Those are the places where things could take longer because they will be counting a massive trove of absentee ballots all at once. That could take into the early hours of Wednesday morning, possibly even longer. The Elections Commission has said once a counting facility such as that in Milwaukee starts counting ballots, workers have to go through until all of the ballots are counted. So if you are a poll worker in Wisconsin, you may want to pack extra snacks and an extra large coffee.
Yes, extra large coffee. Well, so Adam, there is currently a lawsuit before the U.S. Supreme Court over extending the deadline to count all of those mail-in ballots. Walk us through the lawsuit and where it stands now.
So this all stems from a case that began back before that April election. So in September, a federal district court judge ruled that any ballot that was postmarked by November 3rd, Election Day, and arrived 6 days later, November 9th, should be counted. That was the same relief that was granted to Wisconsin voters in April. Normally, ballots are due by 8 p.m. on Election Day. During that extended period in April, that extra 6 days, the same period that this federal judge was set to allow in this election, almost 80,000 votes arrived. That's about 80,000 votes that otherwise would not have counted in that election. And that has been the big argument that Democrats and some of their allies have made for extending absentee voting. Now, Republicans have said there's plenty of options, plenty more time. April was a unique situation. We don't need that extension. Recently, a federal appeals court agreed and said this is up to the legislature to change this, not a federal judge. Democrats and their allies have appealed that to the United States Supreme Court. We are awaiting a decision. It will be very closely watched. And again, you will see a lot of people, whether that deadline remains on Election Day, as it is right now. If you live in Wisconsin, as we speak, you have to have your absentee ballot in by 8 o'clock on Election Day. You'll hear a lot of people, though, pointing to that 80,000 number, whether that extension is granted by the U.S. Supreme Court or whether the Election Day deadline remains in place.
Well, our latest CBS Battleground tracker is giving a slight edge to Biden in Wisconsin, but it is still a close race. How important is the state to both candidates, and what are their strategies for winning over Wisconsin voters?
Well, of course, this was part of that famous trio of states President Trump flipped in 2016, along with Michigan and Pennsylvania. Among those three, it admittedly does have the fewest electoral votes at stake, but both campaigns have been fiercely competing here. President Trump has come to campaign in Wisconsin 6 times since the start of 2019, been here a couple other times for some White House official visits. He was just here on Saturday in Janesville. Thousands of his supporters showed up at that event. Vice President Mike Pence has been here 5 times since August. The Trump campaign has invested a lot of time sending Mr. Trump and Vice President Pence to this state to campaign. The Republicans overall have done more in-person work campaigning in this state than Democrats. That's been the case across the country, that they've been more into in-person canvassing and in-person events. We've heard the president talk about the economy. He brought up Kenosha during his rally on Saturday. As for Vice President Biden, he's been here twice. Of course, the Democratic National Convention was supposed to be here, and it ended up being a virtual event. He was in Kenosha and then was up in northeast Wisconsin, a more working-class area. Recently, Democratic Vice Presidential nominee Kamala Harris has been to Wisconsin once, but the Biden campaign has outspent the Trump campaign by about 3-1 on advertising in the state, focusing on things like the president's response to COVID and some of the character arguments that the Biden campaign has been making. Now, our polling did show that Vice President Biden is cutting in with a couple of groups that were very strong for President Trump in 2016. That's white voters without college degrees and white men. President Trump's still leading those, but by much less than he did in 2016, something to keep an eye on as we head into these final 2 weeks.
Finally, Adam, you've talked to voters in Wisconsin. A lot have already made up their minds on who they're voting for. So what is it that they've been telling you?
You know, people seem to be quite dug in and energized, Elaine, this election. Our polling showed there's very few voters who said that they're undecided and not sure who they're going to support at this point. That doesn't mean they're not out there, but there are few of them. At the Trump rally, you know, speaking to his supporters, they are fired up. They are very worried about what might happen if Joe Biden wins the presidency. They love what the president has done. I met a woman who voted for Barack Obama twice in 2008 and 2012, didn't really like either candidate in 2016, sat out the election. She said she was just kind of busy and didn't feel excited, but she loves what President Trump has done in office, and she's going to be voting for him. How many people like her exist will be key for the president. That being said, I spent a lot of time here at this voting precinct in Milwaukee today, where the lines were long, or substantial, I should say, most of the day, not necessarily like we'd seen in Texas or Florida. But people here were enthusiastic and energized, and they were saying, I'll be here no matter how long and all day, and I just feel an energy that I didn't feel 4 years ago for myself and among the people who I speak with. And so these people here are fired up. Milwaukee is a key part of the Biden campaign's strategy and a key for Democrats in this state. When they win statewide, you have to do well and have high turnout in Milwaukee and significant margins in this area. And I'll point to how close this race is by a town I was in yesterday that voted for Barack Obama in 2012, President Trump in 2016, and in 2018 voted for former Republican Governor Scott Walker and Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin. So a true swing town by any definition. Within a few block stretch, there were 3 sets of neighbors, a Joe Biden sign on one yard, a Donald Trump sign on the yard next to it. I think that town itself illustrates how close this election might be. The 2016 election was very close. The 2004 election was very close. The 2000 election was very close. The only ones that weren't were when Barack Obama was on the ticket. He's not on the ballot this time. I think everyone is bracing for a very close race here.
Yeah, wow, so fascinating to hear those stories. Adam Brewster on the ground for us there in Wisconsin. Adam, we are in that home stretch, 14 days. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Elaine.